good afternoon, good morning, and good evening, wherever you are in the world. And we're going to talk today about Microsoft audits. We are people from SAMexpert. I'll later introduce ourselves, but I want to set the scene of what we're going to be talking about first. According to Flixera's report and, well, other industry reports, Gartner included, about 50% of the companies are still struggling with software vendor audits. And Microsoft being one of the top vendors, together with Oracle, together with Broadcom, VMware, are applying a massive pressure on various organizations and various industries and regions, verifying compliance, trying to find any discrepancies and inconsistencies in usage of their software. It's never a pleasant exercise. It's disruptive. It's expensive. We're going to talk about that as well. And we want to specifically talk about Microsoft today, because Microsoft is our specialty. We are a company that is deliberately not a Microsoft partner. We protect our clients from audits, and we help our clients reduce various Microsoft licensing costs at renewals, in Azure. When you think about Microsoft and money, basically that's where we are championing on your behalf. And I have with me Daryl Ullman, my partner in business and crime. And he's our chief negotiation officer. He deals with the consequences of what audits find. I'm responsible for the technical side of that. And we wanted to talk today about very specifically around, not necessarily limited to, but around what triggers Microsoft audits. How does Microsoft choose the next target? Are you on the radar? And I can tell you that if you're a service provider, you're guaranteed on the radar. If you're an organization that is not a service provider, an end-user organization, then there is a chance you can get an audit depending on what territory you're in, what that current Microsoft's territory's position in regards to audits, whether they're meeting their targets or not. I'll pass the mic to Daryl for maybe the next kind of round, and then we'll just jump straight into Daryl discussing with you all the potential triggers and the history.
Thank you for that, Sasha. Nice to be on another live with you and with our audience. So one of the things that I keep hearing from our customers is, as Sasha pointed out, why are we being audited? We are a enterprise agreement customer, or maybe a SPLA agreement if you're a hosting provider. Everything's in the cloud. We've hardly got, well, most of our data centers have been migrated. Our Office desktop applications are all 365 or cloud subscriptions. What have they got to look for? And it's always a surprise in this day and era. And what I say, what I come back and based on other audits that we manage and bring to a closure, is that it's sometimes around purely pushing you towards an additional potential buy-in to Microsoft services. So they're looking to leverage something within your organization, trying to almost, I would say, sometimes fish out some kind of licensing gap that can be used to potentially increase their leverage in negotiations. But that's only one side of it. Another side of it is what goes on with the Microsoft, let's call it data analytics AI teams. And they look for certain triggers. And that usually starts to happen when a specific region is short on revenue. But there's always a financial driver behind the initiation of an audit process. It could be, as I said, specifically per customer, per account team that want some kind of leverage to drive some new technology and use that as leverage, those gaps. Basically find the gap and then come in and say, well, we'll make that discrepancy disappear if you kindly enough join us in our journey with this greatest next technology. Could be anything in the Microsoft scope. Usually, of course, AI, Copilot, those are the big things, maybe even E7 today. But then
Oh,
again,
yes.
yeah, so that's a big thing. We'll talk about that as a trigger and Microsoft's financial position and market position in a second. But it's more likely to come from a regional perspective of there is revenue that needs to be, there's a revenue gap, there's a target gap. And then who do you go after? Who's the easiest candidates? It's usually organizations that have gone through certain mergers, acquisitions. I'm just giving you the highlights and we'll get into some more details. So if you've gone through a large merger acquisition, maybe even a large spin-off of some division, and you still have the licenses, but you haven't transferred them. Those are the kind of basic triggers that Microsoft is looking for, because if you're an enterprise agreement organization and you ticked a very almost basic box that says you and all affiliates are party to
Oh,
this agreement, and you haven't defined which entities. You have various options. I think there's 3 boxes there. One of the boxes is you and everyone else under your business, or you excluding, or you and. So usually most organizations automatically, they don't even know it. It's done automatically. It's just been done for so many years. It includes all affiliates, meaning that any new affiliate potentially that you have acquired needs to be party to that agreement. And it doesn't matter if they are compliant or not compliant. You need to license them under your enterprise agreement. And if it's a large acquisition, then of course that data is out there. There's a trigger, either automatically through AI data analysis, or maybe the account team has noticed that and they haven't made good progress, or they don't have a good relationship with that account. So they trigger through various internal Microsoft systems that merger and non-compliance issue. And then an audit is initiated. Those are some of the most basic triggers that we see today in the enterprise space. On the other hand, and then I'll turn it over to you, Sasha, we have the hosting providers that they have an equivalent to an EA is a SPLA agreement, a service provider license agreement. That's basically the equivalent on the other side of those providers that are providing a service based on Microsoft technology in various ways. And what happens there is actually, I'd almost say it's almost a routine automatic process. So it differs from enterprise customers, where enterprise customers are not targeted on a regular cycle. There are certain triggers that trigger an audit, where on the SPLA hosting providers, it's less specific triggers. There are triggers. We'll talk about it. I'll let Sasha bring it up. But it's more around not if it's going to happen, but when it's going to happen. Because there is a 3 to 5 year cycle where I would say almost all organizations come up. There are always misses if you're lucky, and it's not 5, it's 6 or 7. We do have cases where organizations have been very lucky, but it's usually 3 to 5 year cycle where you actually receive 2 types of audits in general. Again, let's keep this general before we take a deeper dive. And then you receive either a self-audit, usually for smaller providers. Smaller provider for Microsoft is a provider that is in the range of up to, I would say, 15 to $20,000 euros per month reporting on average. Okay, not exact, but on average, if you are a 15 to 20K organization reporting on a monthly basis your supply usage, then you'll most probably receive a self-declaration or self-audit that needs to be done. Again, we can talk about how to. I think we've got other videos on how to approach that. We can talk about it today if anybody wants to hear a bit more about that. But that's an audit, but it's a soft audit. You need to work through it. You need to be compliant, and there are things that need to be done. Otherwise, it will potentially trigger the second type of audit. That's not a pleasant audit, and that's an audit that is going to be managed by one of Microsoft's partners, being one of the big four accounting firms: PwC, Deloitte, KPMG, and the fourth one. Sorry, I've gone PwC, KPMG, Deloitte, and
EY.
And EY. Thank you. I missed EY. Thank you. So yeah, Ernst & Young. So any one of those four, when you get a full-blown audit, usually, again, as I said, above the 20K threshold per month, that is, of course, an unpleasant occurrence because it's going to be very, very time-consuming. Resources, time, people, and then potentially at the end of that, there's going to be a bill that's you'll need to pay, or the equivalent of some kind of other service. Again, there are alternatives when negotiated with Microsoft. So just in general, just setting the scope of types of audits, type of organizations, and triggers. Sasha.
Thank you, Daryl. You've set the scene perfectly. I want to go on a bit of details and a few historical, probably, walkthroughs of how this all developed, what it looked like before. And it's all important information to understand why Microsoft chooses specific organizations and how. But I need to caveat it very carefully, is what we're talking about right now. Obviously, we're not Microsoft employees. And the internal mechanisms, they will never disclose them 100%. But we've had experience, each of us, 25 to 30 years working alongside Microsoft or around Microsoft ecosystem. Daryl even worked for Microsoft. He was one of the people who launched Enterprise Agreement Program back in the day. So trust us, we know, or we can very closely guess, what it is and infer from the patterns. And patterns become clear. After you've done it 100 of times or more than that, patterns become clear. And the main pattern that Daryl already mentioned is that audits are effectively sales exercises. Historically, audits were delegated to the license and contractual compliance LCC department in Microsoft, which was a heavily legal department. They had representations in every country, not anymore, by the way. They shrunk to 3 worldwide offices: Singapore, Dublin, and basically Redmond, where Microsoft is located. I'm not sure whether they sit in Bellevue, but anyway, in Washington State, USA. And it was all scary. It was all about contractual compliance. But at the end of the day, it was Microsoft recovering lost revenue from people who used Microsoft software non-compliantly. I'm specifically not saying illegally, because legality and compliance, they are side by side, but they're different things. A few years ago, when LCC was restructured and effectively was targeted mostly at service providers at that time, audit slowly started migrating to a different team. I mean, obviously, probably Microsoft flipped the switch. It's just the overall ecosystem was shifting towards the team that was called, the financial revenue team. I don't remember the exact name, but effectively people clearly responsible, not for compliance, but for revenue. So now it became more about as Daryl already explained, a way of finding another leverage. I'll put it very softly. Finding another leverage to convince the client that probably it's the time to move to Azure. It's probably the time to consider Microsoft 365 E5. By the way, to my big surprise, E5 is almost, 15 years old? It's crazy. 10, at least 10. At least 10. Nowadays, just recently, audits, at least with service providers, are sitting with the data center optimization team. The change happened mid last year. As far as we understand, it sits under Amy Hood, the Microsoft CFO. Very experienced person, very good CFO with a lot of history with Microsoft. And despite the name data center optimization, what they optimize is the sales of Microsoft Azure. Yeah, I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm just saying we need to be absolutely clear what data center optimization means. And they're now responsible for audits. So that is the historical excursus. And to summarize it, go back to what I started from, they are sales exercises. So let's be clear about it. Audits are sales exercises, and more and more and more. And Microsoft is not in a fantastic position. They lost 23% of their stock value recently because on one hand they lost the pace of growth, and it's an insane growth. I'm still baffled. I'm not an institutional investor. I'm a hobbyist investor. If I see someone's growth dropping from 40% a year to 39%, is that a reason to panic? There was a different reason to panic, though. It's not about the loss of growth by 1%. It's about converging course on much faster growth of investment in Azure for AI. So that gap between the growth of the investment, the CapEx and OpEx, and revenue growth is shrinking. They're on converging courses. And therefore, Microsoft they're not panicking. Microsoft doesn't panic. They regrouped, and they are using now new tools to increase that revenue. And Audit is just one of those tools. So that's it. Let's be clear about that particular topic. And as Daryl as well mentioned, I want to also reemphasize that service providers are embedded in a different area. And we're closing on scenarios and red flags and why audits happen. When in the enterprise world, there is a mechanism and there are certain red flags which decide who Microsoft is going to audit next. Service providers obviously have the same sort of criteria. In addition to that, Microsoft has to license service providers because they are responsible to authorities in the United States that all their partners use their software compliantly and they don't violate American trade laws. That's how Microsoft calls it, trade laws, without going into details. And there are rules, for example, not to sell to the Russians at this moment in time, and other similar rules. And because Microsoft's service providers are effectively Microsoft's partners. To have a supply agreement, you have to be a Microsoft partner. You are reselling their software. You are their storefront. So they must audit how you resell, how you provide their software. So that's in addition to the triggers. And on the mergers and acquisitions side, Daryl gave a very good example. When you have an enterprise agreement and you have an entity that you acquired and then you did not license them, you have to. It's very clearly in the contract. You promise that all your affiliated entities will be under that contract. There is a transition period. They won't come to you in a week's time after you acquired the large entity. They will watch you maybe for a year or two. And if you're not moving, if they still not under your umbrella of the big enterprise agreement, especially interestingly, there are commercial interests of certain regional departments. So if you acquired an entity in a region, but you are located in a different region, there's an interesting power play that could suddenly appear between Microsoft's regional offices. Everyone wants their revenue, and you're not doing anything. You're perceived as non-compliant. You may even have the licenses, but you're contractually non-compliant. They want that revenue. They want that revenue. How to recover that revenue if you're not playing by the rules nicely yourself? It's an audit. It's an audit. If you are, well, this is a recent trigger. If you are still on-prem, or even decided to, you know what, we're going back on-prem, back in-house. We don't want Microsoft Office, Microsoft 365 anymore. You'll be surprised. There are large international organizations that are getting rid of Microsoft 365. Imagine Microsoft's disappointment in such organizations. So they are, at one point, they're a cash cow. They acquire new products. There is some positive dynamics, positive from the point of view of Microsoft. And then suddenly they say, you know what, we all migrate into Linux and other products. It's happening. It's not a legend. Can't disclose the names. Obviously, how can they convince you to stay on those products, or maybe expand, or at least recover some revenue? Because usually during those migrations, let's be clear, during those on-premises kind of going back on-prem transitions, mistakes are made that could be pretty large. I'm talking about like 7-8 figures, massive mistakes, because people are forgetting the old licensing programs, you know, that you had to have software assurance. You can't just get rid of it. You know, you can't virtualize without software assurance. Big secret to many still. So they want to have that leverage to either keep you on Microsoft 365, expand in Microsoft 365, move to Azure if you're still massively on-premise, or at least recover lost revenue. And we've seen cases where Microsoft embarrassed themselves, but we've seen cases when it was not as pleasant, and Daryl did a very good job negotiating on behalf of the client, but it was not an easy journey, I must tell you. So, and here I want to bring in something very, very new and fresh and hot off the plate. I should have probably started this live with this. In Microsoft 365, there are different packages. You're aware of that. I hope you're aware of that. There are packages like Microsoft 365 E3, Microsoft 365 E5, and they differ. E5 is bigger than E3. Interestingly, for whatever reason, if you only buy one license of Microsoft 365 E5, you don't only enable one user with that license and all their features. There are so-called tenant-wide services. And tenant-wide services are still officially on the Microsoft's websites, on learn.microsoft.com, are still kind of like a soft compliance item. Let me explain. What Microsoft is saying is that by enabling E5 in your tenant, you inadvertently, because that's how these services are designed, there are no controls, enable that some of the components, paid components, for everybody else who's not licensed. And what Microsoft is saying, still officially, is that you need to pay for the users that benefit from these services. Unofficially, however, and I must play a bit of devil advocate, I don't think it's company's policy, but I think it's more of an initiative of people in certain regions and teams and whatnot, because they see that's data. It's on their servers. They can see it. They see it. They see your acquisitions. They see that usage. Maybe anonymized, but they see the numbers. and they may see that if you gave it this license to just one person, 10 persons, it's part of your estate, but others are, for example, benefiting from Microsoft Defender for Outlook, which is included in E5, and when you activate E5, it's given to everyone. They may come to you and say, well, you owe us the money for all this usage. And this is happening unofficially, behind closed doors, hush hush, happening right now. And I'm happy to say it openly because I've heard it from enough number of people to say that it's not a secret anymore. The secret is out of the box. I'm sorry. So this and answers the question that Daryl asked, like, why are they auditing us? We are on 365. We have very little on-premises estate. Well, that's why. And we're going to see those more and more. And I don't think, well, it was coming. It was coming. Still, officially, it's kind of a soft compliance item.
So I want to just add on to that, Sasha, sorry for interrupting. I just want to add on to what you just said around, let's call it soft compliance, that open you up to some substantial cost risks. So another good example for that is when you utilize on Azure the license, not bring your own license. Sorry, I've gone.
Azure Hybrid benefits. Bring your own license.
Azure Hybrid.
Bring your own license.
Thank you. Yeah, bring your own license, but it's named Azure Hybrid Benefits, AHUB. So what's happened over the years is that when services are enabled, almost as a default, many Azure or cloud engineers automatically just provision that Azure Hybrid Benefits use because they know that there's an enterprise agreement in the company. Somebody mentioned it, there's a rumor, and then there's an understanding that if you have an enterprise agreement, then automatically you have Azure Hybrid Benefits for everything under the sun that's allowed. And then everybody just ticks that box. Most cases, you don't have enough licenses. We've come across this. This is like almost a
started 5 years ago, and it's going on and on and on.
Yeah. So what we do always when we start a inventory check or true up or any kind of discussion is we actually run reports to identify on Azure what services are using Azure Hybrid Use Benefits. And then we go back and we cross-reference that to the number of licenses with software assurance under enterprise agreement. And then there's all kinds of calculations of enablement. Some licenses have dual rights. Some licenses only carry either one of those rights, either here or there. There are different rights for different products without getting into the details today. Everything's on the web now. You can look it up. And I would say 99% of the time that we do this compliance check, inventory compliance check, when we prepare a customer for a contract, they're out of compliance. And Microsoft knows this. This is not a big secret. So a soft audit that happens in the back end is that Microsoft goes through and checks organizations that are highly using Azure Hybrid Benefits. And that sometimes triggers what Sasha called a soft compliance request, where they now want to understand how are you using those Azure Hybrid Benefits? How are you utilizing it under your EA? That can trigger an audit as well, a different type of audit that we're all used to, or that's common, that where they audit the entire organization. It could just be a very specific audit. It could be brought up as leverage as part of your EA renewal negotiations, where you feel that you're really compliant on the server side because you've got a certain on-prem, and then the account rep comes back, account executive, commercial manager, whatever you deal with, and then they say, but what about all those servers that you've marked as Azure Hybrid Benefits?
Mm-hmm.
And then it's huge. You want to make it go away? Well, there are two ways to do it. You either increase your Azure spend with us, move all that to Azure, or you increase your server spend, something that they're not really looking for, or there's maybe some kind of other very creative way of solving it.
Switch all your SQL service to Azure Arc. Same money, but the money drips into the Azure wallet in Microsoft.
Exactly.
So yeah,
Exactly.
creative ways, as Dan just said.
So creative way. So the end game is always how does Microsoft increase their commercial? How does Microsoft incentivize you to increase your commercial spend with them, and especially around the cloud? Okay, so to increase your SQL Server on-prem and Windows Server on-prem licensing is not interesting. Okay, it's revenue, but it's not the right revenue. So everything will be pushed towards either Arc something, or purely increase your Azure spend or your 365 spend, more licenses, E5s, security. So there's a reason behind it. So audits are much more not complicated, but sophisticated today.
Good word.
Than before. There are different triggers that Microsoft is looking for. On the if we go back 1 second to the service providers.
Oh yeah.
Side. Sometimes the triggers are, as I said, one, you have the cycle, the 3 to 5 year cycle. It just happens. But there are also other triggers that initiate an audit. So that is the cycle, and then there's like intermediate audit. That comes through Microsoft reviewing a customer by customer. Again, they have their analytical tools to look for misalignment in certain licenses. So if you have only Windows Server licenses, but there are no SQL Server or no RDS, there's a trigger there, because usually it comes with a certain amount, and if you're in a certain area of providing a service, then there's an expectation that you're going to have additional licenses. Or if you're only reporting SQL Server licenses and no Windows Server licenses for whatever reason, or you're reporting Office licenses, but there's no RDS licenses to accompany that. So there's all kinds of triggers, and if the numbers don't match up based on their statistics, then again, there's going to be a trigger for an audit.
Yes, you're sitting outside the pattern, and you're suddenly
exactly
in the crossfire.
Yeah, exactly, you're outside the pattern. Okay, another trigger potentially could be that you realized internally, as again service provider, that you've made a mistake over the years with your reporting. Somebody new comes in, starts to check what's happening, or maybe there's a new onboarding of a big customer, and you increase or maybe decrease. It can go both ways depending on what you're doing, but you realign your monthly spend, your monthly reporting, sometimes in an excess of, just say on average, just say by 20%, 25% in one lump report. That readjustment, up or down, doesn't matter, will trigger potentially an audit, because that shows something fishy is going on here, and that will start the process. So we always, if you are going to be realigning, and it's a correct realignment, something really major has happened, I would do two things. I would inform my reseller, and if I have an account rep by chance, likely you don't these days, but if you do, I would inform them of changes happening, reasons, just set the scene. And the second thing that I would do, I would make sure that I am compliant. If I'm going to readjust my reporting by over 20-25%, you must know that this is going to trigger something. Make sure your house is in order, that everything else you're reporting is aligned, because you will get that you'll most probably will. Okay, it's nothing certain in this life. Microsoft's got hundreds, thousands of customers. They can't audit everyone at the same time. So you might be lucky, and they might not get you for the next 12, 24 months. That's just how life is. But I would prepare if you do have that large lump realignment.
Also, a completely different to that, static numbers.
Yeah.
For example, if you report static numbers for 6 months, then it goes even not by 25%, slightly different. And again, static. What it shows to Microsoft is that you're not controlling your estate.
You're not really counting anything. No, you're not really counting.
Anything.
It's not live counting. It's not actual usage.
And in our experience, in all such cases, counting is manual. Numbers are taken out of whatever they are taken out of.
Invoices, billing data.
And they are not accurate. I'm not saying they're always inaccurate in terms of you have less licenses than you need to. Sometimes you have more. This is another negative consequence of not managing your estate properly. Like we had a discussion only recently when it appeared that the client was paying double for the same licenses. Why? And a provider, service provider. So they're looking for pattern disruptions, and before that, now imagine in the age of AI. Before that, they used kind of semi-AI algorithmic software. If I remember correctly, I heard it from a very good source that Microsoft had an intelligence system developed, finally out by IBM, in around it was 2009, I guess. So these days, they have their own AI. They have their own platform. And AI is very good at pattern analysis. And to be honest, it's not always AI. Because, for example, I remember one bank, international bank, that bragged in the press that they have, for whatever reason, maybe to impress the public, they had 45,000 employees headcount. And Microsoft looked into their records. They saw that, and their manager, or maybe not their manager, somebody who wanted to sell them something. They were on his radar. He looked up the enterprise agreement, and it was only for 20,000 people. And at the time, enterprise agreement had to be signed for every qualified user. So imagine this: the bank is bragging 45,000 people. The agreement is 20,000. In practice, it appeared that they only had 27. They just kind of inflated the numbers a little bit to look cool. They triggered an audit. They triggered a direct audit just by that. So that misalignment. And all these systems now, not humans, agents, are gathering all those little pieces of data, and it's all stored somewhere in the big lake of data. And this is how they know. This is how they think that you may be a potential target for an audit. So it all comes back to, as Daryl said, having your house in order. Whether you're a service provider, it's a bit more difficult. Whether you're an end-user organization, still looking after you need to comply with the enterprise agreement. You can't just, for example, I know it's becoming old school software assurance, but you can't just cancel software assurance. Well, we're moving to the cloud. We don't need that software assurance anymore. You become non-compliant in a second on a massive server estate that you have. And, for example, if you bring your licenses to Azure and you cancel software assurance, you can't bring them to Azure anymore. And Microsoft sees it. They don't necessarily see every single nitty-gritty. They probably, if you trust the agreements and all the terms and conditions, they probably don't see the names of accounts and whatnot. But the numbers are easy to see. The numbers are there. The numbers affect how much compute they need. So these are all tracked. So it's not that difficult to infer that potentially somewhere there is an opportunity for an upsale.
I want to just add at least my last closing remarks, Sasha. I don't know if you want to add anything else, but just on my closing note, I'm asked frequently, and I review the market trends and polls that are out there regarding are audits going to decline or increase? And there was a certain time where audits did decrease. That's the truth. If we look back, I would say 2, 3, 4 years ago, they were on a decrease. Heard less about audits. Specific regions were less audited. I would say Europe, around the enterprise customer side, is still, I won't say in a decline, but it's in a steady state of audits. And that trend, and this is why we are advocating the subject that we haven't advocated in a long time. We haven't. I don't think we've spoken about audits, at least on a regular basis, over the last 2 years or maybe 3 years. Is that we see an increase, and not only that do we see an increase, as part of the community, I believe that audits are actually going to increase from the pure reason that, again, we're talking about Microsoft, and it's actually correct for all of the vendors, all the software vendors. The investments that all the large players are putting into AI, meaning into hardware, into data centers, building them up, the cost of maintenance. This is a kind of cost Microsoft never had, that Oracle never had. This is ongoing operational cost at the highest levels of billions and billions and capex investments that these companies are not used to. They are used to producing software, selling it for very large margins, and their only operational cost was human resources, nothing else. So the whole paradigm of how Oracle, Microsoft, and all these other major companies are moving forward, the whole operational setup is completely different to what it was 3 to 5 to 10 years ago. It's a different ball game, meaning that, one, we can all see what's happening to the stock price. Oracle is cut by 50% since their peak. Microsoft's dropping, as Sasha said, and it's a tough time for these companies. They are going to be looking for additional revenue. It's just the name of the game. And when you need additional revenue, you're going to bring back old techniques or old tactics. And one of the basic old tactics that's always worked, because we all know that no one's really 100% compliant. That's just life, very difficult to be, is to bring back audits. So I totally can see the increase now, and I think it's going to only grow based on the market trends, that audits are going to increase. But they're different. So it's not about preparing the way that you used to go out there and buy super expensive software asset management tools, spend millions on implementation to understand how many Visio project, what's on your last desktop. That's not the game. Okay, I'm not a big advocate of, never been a big advocate of software asset management tools, and I'm not planning to be. But you need to have a different mindset of how to manage the right assets, because you won't be audited on everything and old school. It's a different type of approach. So you need to start thinking about it. I know it's not sexy. It's not a business interest to prepare for an audit. Sometimes you actually don't even prepare for an audit because it's a risk that maybe is worthwhile taking, instead of investing millions and millions in software asset management tools. So there's a upside and downside to each one, but just have that mindset of, okay, let's look out for those triggers. Let's be cautious on how we act, and if we do something, let's just be prepared if somebody does knock on our door. Go through your basic ABC checklist. As Sasha said, if you're an enterprise customer, go through your Azure Hybrid Benefit checklist, go through your E5 or security components that inadvertently you've enabled your entire organization, your SQL Server stuff, some of the basic stuff that will trigger it. On the service provider side, again, look at your trend, how you're reporting, if it's flat over time, or if it's all of a sudden these big increases or decreases, mergers, acquisitions. It's not rocket science. It's really common sense. Keep in the back of your mind, and just be aware that those could bring upon an audit.
We have a question there if you want to take it from Keith.
Keith, long time. Good old friend. Yeah.
Are Microsoft audits
Are
coordinated?
MS audits coordinated across regions, or is it a regional P&L that drives the audits? And does MS publish the region's boundaries? It's very regional. It's not cross-regional at all. It's region per region. It's actually, I would even go more specific, Keith. It's geography specific. So I'll give you an example of a customer of ours in Asia Pacific, and they acquired a US company. It usually happens the other way around, the US. But in this case, this company purchased a larger US-based organization than themselves. And that triggered an audit for the American company because they were, to my opinion, what happened was that the account team there understood that they are potentially going to be losing out on revenue because of the new company, the Asia Pacific company, merging it together under their EA, big changes, layoffs, the whole thing that goes around a large merger. And they initiated an audit only for the American company, for the previous brand or for that acquired company. Very regional. They didn't want to go into that Asia Pacific company at all. They just wanted to make sure they're going to get as much revenue as possible, as quick as possible, and be ready for that acquisition. Actually, when it went through, because there's always a time lapse. So that's how regional and could be very, very, very specific.
Regional boundaries. Microsoft doesn't publish this information at all. It's not public. They will never tell you that we're going to audit European enterprise customers tomorrow. Next year is going to increase. Since we're in this business, we have our own set of metrics that we have to constantly monitor. Call specific people, look at specific numbers. Watch headcounts and auditors, all those kinds of things, which give us pretty good, circumstantial, but pretty good benchmarking of what can happen. And I can tell you that we see increased activity in North America since the beginning of last year. We see increased activity in Asia. In Europe, Microsoft is basically saying no, not going to touch anybody in Europe. Not service providers. Service providers are under
service providers.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah, exactly. But enterprise customers. Yeah.
Enterprise customers. Nobody guarantees that tomorrow Europe doesn't, Microsoft Thailand doesn't get a new sales target for Azure, and Microsoft 365 E7 that will. In 16 days become a reality if Microsoft keeps to its promise. That will be an interesting exercise, and teams that were selling E5 and slowly, it's kind of slowed this down recently. I think they will be incentivized to at least move companies to E5 to stop dealing with like fourth layers of E3, E1, and whatnot. So there'll be another push for sales. Nobody guarantees that in Europe audits will not be revived. And if you think about regions like DACH, which is still heavily on-premise, I would say DACH and maybe Nordics. No, Nordics is more in the cloud than DACH. Are potentially in the crosshairs of those audits if they return. And again, service providers, doesn't matter where you are. You'll receive either an audit notice or a self assessment. And by all means, don't reject self-assessment notices, because the process there is designed in a way when you report that you're fine, and they send you a letter at the end of the process. Thank you. Your report will be filed with your account and used in future potential verifications. So that's the truth. Be very, very careful with that. And it's a vast topic. We can talk about it for hours. I have in front of me, we did a bit of a brainstorm, almost a page of various triggers the red flags that Microsoft is looking for. But what we told you in this live event should give you enough information to understand the system, how it works, and assess yourselves whether you are a potential target for an audit. And if you have any doubts, just give us a shout. We can advise you on whether you should what you should be looking at, what you should be looking after, to be less of a target for an audit. And thank you very much, Daryl. Thank you very much all for being with us. Thank you for the questions. And Keith, thank you. We are well. Thanks God. And I hope you're well too. Have a great rest of the day and the week. Have a very productive week. And come back to our channel. We are live once a month these days. It may change, but we're always here updating you on what's going on in the world of Microsoft.